I knew they never read the reports. Not really. Maybe they skimmed the headers. Maybe they forwarded the PDFs to their assistants with some half-baked review this comment. But the moment I knew I was invisible was the day we simulated a total server blackout, and the VP of product asked if the blinking red light meant something was actually wrong. No, Todd. The blinking red light was just for ambiance, like I staged a haunted house in our disaster recovery suite. For 8 years, I ran DR drills like clockwork. I didn't care for applause. I cared that the company didn't fold like a cheap lawn chair the second something went sideways. Every test we ran, every playbook we built, every cross-departmental walkthrough was meant to avoid chaos. But to the execs upstairs, I was background noise. Necessary, maybe, but not exciting. Until things broke, I was just that continuity lady. And I was fine with that. Hell, I preferred it. While everyone else clinked glasses at growth forecasts and new client signings, I was in the weeds, double-checking failover logs, walking teams through virtual cutovers, documenting every missed step like I was prepping for a courtroom battle. We had power outages, ransomware scares, even one rogue AI script that tried to spin up 200 nodes in Germany. We stayed standing through it all because my protocols worked. Quietly, repetitively. Boring, beautiful preparedness, but here's the thing. Most people don't respect the fire drill until they smell smoke. And eventually, that indifference calcifies into arrogance. When the new wave of leadership came in, the kind with slick hair and disruptor on their LinkedIn bios, the first thing they did was cut anything that didn't sparkle in a slide deck. That meant me. By the way, if you've made it this far and appreciate stories where quiet work turns into loud consequences, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe. 97% of folks listening haven't subscribed yet, and it truly helps the team keep sharing stories like this one. All right, back to the storm before the storm. I remember the exact week it started. A corporate reshuffle email landed in my inbox. Please welcome Darren Rolston as our new head of facilities and physical infrastructure. Sounded harmless enough, but within days, the man was in meetings talking about visual cohesion and operational storytelling, like our server racks were part of an art exhibit. I kid you not, he ordered matte black cable sleeves because exposed color distracts the eye. He showed up to one of my drills. Once. 15 minutes in, while I was walking through recovery priority tiers, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "This feels like theater. Are you sure we need this much formality for a hypothetical?" I froze mid-slide. The engineers all looked at their shoes. I tried to keep my voice level when I said, "It's only hypothetical until the water hits the wires, Darren." He chuckled. "Right. Well, carry on." That moment, that was the first crack. I could feel it splintering. Within a month, he'd reassigned half my team, told them they were being repurposed to real-time value streams. The budget line for our offsite backup rotations got flagged as legacy infrastructure redundancy, and suddenly, my renewal requests were under review, corporate code for going nowhere. But I kept working, I kept drilling, I kept documenting, because if there's one thing I've learned in this field, it's that when the lights go out, no one remembers the guy with the buzzwords. They remember the woman who printed the checklist that saved their asses. Darren Rolston strutted into the department meeting like a man who'd just discovered disaster recovery on a TED Talk and figured he knew more than the rest of us combined. He had that Silicon Valley gloss, tight navy blazer, sneakers that cost more than my mortgage, and a tablet he wouldn't stop waving around like it was the Torah of modern operations. I don't remember what slide he was on, but it was something asinine like legacy habits versus scalable future. Then he said it. This whole disaster recovery protocol, honestly, it feels like theater. I didn't even blink. You ever hear something so dumb, your brain just buffers? That was me. Meanwhile, half the room turned toward me like they were waiting for me to explode. I didn't. I just smiled, flipped to my own set of notes, and asked, "Would you like me to walk you through the last incident timeline again? The one where our secondary firewall failed and my theater kept us from being locked out of 5 federal contracts?" He smirked. Not saying we don't need some process, just saying the current model isn't agile, it's reactive, not adaptive. We should be optimizing for resilience through dynamic data models. I could have decked him with a whiteboard marker, but here's the thing about guys like Rolston. They never actually do anything. They just name the thing you're already doing, slap a buzzword on it, then act like they invented the wheel. Except he wasn't content with showboating. He came to dismantle. And leadership? They lapped it up. Within a week, my quarterly test slots were cut from 4 hours to 2. Too disruptive, Rolston said. Let's pivot to tabletop simulations. Tabletop. As if we could sketch out catastrophe and call it readiness. Then he downgraded our cloud redundancy plan, merged 2 isolated environments to cut storage waste. I warned him about dependency loops. He nodded like he was listening, then sent out an all-staff memo about streamlining complexity to empower lean resilience. I stared at that sentence for 5 minutes, wondering how a man could say absolutely nothing in 12 words and still get a bonus. The final straw was when I saw the staging server decommission order. It wasn't sent to me, it was sent around me, signed, approved, and executed without a single line of technical review. I found out when Jenkins failed a smoke test, and the dev team called me in a panic because half the automation chain had vanished. I marched straight into his glass-walled office and laid the printouts on his desk. You're removing our live fire zones, you're cutting visibility, you're handing our uptime over to Hope and spreadsheets. He didn't look up, just tapped his tablet and said, "Legacy systems create a false sense of safety. Trust me, we're building something smarter. No, Darren, you're building a sandbox, and when the flood comes, it'll wash straight through." He looked at me like I was dramatic, like I was the problem. "I appreciate your passion," he said, which, let me tell you, is HR speak for shut up and leave quietly. I did leave, but not quietly. I started logging everything, every cut, every downgrade, every denial, and I copied legal on every single one. Not because I expected them to act, but because I knew what was coming. And when it hit, I wanted my name nowhere near the wreckage. It was called a modern efficiency audit, but it smelled like a firing squad with Wi-Fi. The spreadsheet came on a Friday. Of course it did. Laid out like a bureaucratic autopsy. 128 budget lines, each with a bright yellow column labeled Rationalization Opportunity. Line 47 was mine. Disaster Recovery and Continuity Ops, $100 $400 annual. There was no comment next to it, just a tiny red flag and a note at the bottom, Review with Darren. I knew what that meant. A meeting where I'd be asked to defend the one thing I thought didn't need defending, as if business continuity was some indulgence, like extra espresso shots or ergonomic chairs. We were storing government data. We handled regulated industries. And they wanted to cut the thing that prevented headlines? I showed up early, folder in hand, every successful test, every compliance report, a list of incidents we'd quietly dodged thanks to systems that weren't sexy but worked. Darren was late. Walked in with cold brew and a tablet under his arm like he was about to lead a yoga class, not gut operational safety. He pulled up my section and said, "So, line 47, walk me through it." I did, clearly. Professionally. I even toned down the technical jargon so he wouldn't feel outpaced. I showed him the risk maps, the mirrored server maps, the vendor contract escalations. Then I paused and waited. He scrolled, barely listening. Then said, "Yeah, but if we just used full cloud failover, wouldn't that be simpler?" I stared. We run hybrid systems. We have physical dependencies, some of which are mandated by compliance contracts. You can't full cloud a system that still requires validated local offsite redundancy. He shrugged. That's legacy thinking. Everything's virtual now. Everything's virtual now. This man had just reduced 8 years of safeguards to a slogan you'd find in a Microsoft ad. I pushed the folder toward him. Page 12 outlines why off-site failover is non-negotiable for systems B and F. If you cut these, you introduce a 19-hour cold start risk, not just a gap, an actual blackout. He tapped his stylus against his teeth. Maybe we're over-engineering for risk that's statistically improbable. Statistically improbable, like tornadoes, or data corruption, or human idiocy. Still, I knew it was over. Not officially, but spiritually. The moment he said that, I felt the clock start ticking. I was a relic, a cautionary tale in waiting. So I did what I always do when the building shakes. I got to work. I scheduled one last DR test, just one. I kept it off the main calendar and ran it quietly, like a ghost drill. Just me and a single junior sysadmin who still believed in infrastructure the way I used to believe in leadership. We ran the scenario. Upstream power loss, service interruption across 3 zones, live switchover under constrained bandwidth. It was rough. Everything took longer. Resources weren't available. The offsite node had been retired already, which meant we failed Tier 3 recovery outright. I documented it all, line by line, delay times, missed handoffs, absent redundancies. There was no sugarcoating it. The system we'd once called resilient was now fragile, and it was only going to get worse. When I filed the report, I added a postscript in bold on the final page. Critical risk introduced by cancellation of offsite mirror node, authorized by R. Rolston, 612. Then I copied legal, compliance, risk, and audit. If I was being erased, I wanted my handwriting on the tombstone. And as I walked out of the server room that night, I paused and looked at the silent racks, lights blinking, fans humming, everything pretending to be fine. They always pretend, until the water comes. There's a strange kind of stillness in the server room when you're running a disaster recovery drill alone. The hum of the cooling fans echoes louder. The blinking lights seem to judge you. Every keystroke feels like a whisper in a cathedral no one visits anymore. And yet there I was, clipboard in hand, badge dangling from my belt like it still meant something, running what I knew was the last full-scale drill I'd ever conduct at Halverson Systems. The downsizing had gutted my team, quietly, methodically, just enough to weaken us without triggering alarm bells. One got reassigned to cloud migration alignment, whatever the hell that meant. Another was reabsorbed into Tier 2 support. The last, Elijah, my right hand, was let go after Rolston decided that one DR lead should be enough in an automated world. So I ran it alone. It started at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday. No one in the office yet. Just me, a pot of stale coffee, and a digital trigger that simulated upstream DNS corruption. From there, the cascade was predictable, but worse than I'd feared. The redundant path, dead, no heartbeat response. The mirror image, gone. The vendor for that node had flagged the contract as lapsed 3 weeks prior, thanks to Darren's budget cleansing. File recovery took 11 minutes longer than baseline. Not a single automated alert made it to the Slack fallback channel. One of the internal scripts triggered a loop that inflated CPU load past 92% before throttling finally kicked in. And the so-called cloud-first failover Rolston championed. It stalled twice, trying to handshake with a now decommissioned access token we used to rotate quarterly, before the rotation schedule got optimized. I logged it all. Failure point number 4, delayed service restart due to manual certificate retrieval after automated cache flush failed. Failure point number 7, data routing loop detected, traced to collapsed priority logic in removed load balancer. Failure point 11, no visibility in layer 3 route table following tier 2 loss. Estimated blackout window, 28 minutes. But the worst line, the one I highlighted, boxed in red and underlined twice, was this. Risk increase due to halted renewal of offsite mirror node, originally authorized under signed directive by R. Rolston, 6-12. That wasn't a note. That was insurance. And not the kind you file, it's the kind you sharpen. By 10:15 a.m., I'd finalized the report. No fluff, no bullet-pointed optimism, just the unvarnished failure map of what used to be a hardened recovery framework, now eroded by buzzwords and ego. I exported it to PDF, triple-checked the timestamps, and submitted it via formal routing to compliance, legal, and internal audit. The subject line was simple. DR Test 6, final report submission. No one replied. No one needed to. They saw the CCs and knew the weight. Before I left the room, I printed 2 copies. One for the Central Compliance Archive, one for my records. And then I sat for a minute. Just sat, alone on the steel bench beside the backup battery housing, watching the faint blue pulse of a server rack that used to hold our failover keys. Now, it was just a skeleton. Empty. That bitterness, it wasn't from being ignored. It was from knowing I was right, and that none of them would care until they were standing in the dark, looking for a switch that didn't exist anymore. The email came through at 3:12 p.m. on a Friday. Of course it did. Friday is where corporate guts its conscience. Subject line, HR meeting, end of week alignment. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. My access badge still worked, which meant they hadn't looped in IT yet. A small mercy. A temporary one. I walked into conference room B, what we used to jokingly call the exit lounge. HR was already seated. Paper folder open like a casket on the table. Darren Rolston wasn't there. Figures. He'd probably already moved my name to the former staff column in his dashboard, then booked himself a kombucha tasting to celebrate. The HR rep read the script like she was trying to beat a personal best. Due to ongoing restructuring aligned with strategic operational efficiency, your role has been evaluated and deemed redundant. Your last day will be effective immediately. I nodded. No questions, no fight. That was the dignity they didn't expect. She slid a single sheet across the table. Separation Agreement Summary. And waited like I might burst into tears. I didn't. I asked to retrieve my personal items and was escorted to my office like a tourist being shown a war crime. My plants were dry, my inbox was full. One sticky note on my monitor read, "Thanks for always having the real answers. L." I took that one with me. Then, with the door closed and no cameras in view, I opened my private file stash and pulled up DR Test 6. I printed it, signed it, slipped it into a red folder I kept for escalations. And with gloves on precision, I navigated to the shared compliance drive. I didn't bury it in subfolders. I didn't label it something obscure. I named it exactly what it was. Final Doctor Report. Q2 submitted 7/14. Then I dropped it into the audit continuity directory, where every compliance officer, every legal associate, and yes, even every board observer had read access. Before I closed the file, I made one last edit to the final page. Right beneath the time-stamped summary of risk vectors and downtime projections, I inserted the line in bold. Decision to remove node confirmed by R. Rolston, 6/12. No commentary, no accusation. Just a fact. Recorded, signed, and time-stamped. I shut down my machine, left my badge on the keyboard, and stepped out into the hallway. The HR rep gave me a nod meant to be comforting. I returned one meant to be final. As I walked out of the building, the sky cracked open in the distance, just a low roll of thunder, but heavy. Storm season was creeping in early this year. And somewhere, in a folder no one reads until they have to, a single PDF was waiting with my name on it. Not a warning, a receipt. It started with an alert on my phone, one of those public service flood warnings you usually ignore unless you live near a river. I was sitting in a second-floor coffee shop on 9th, sipping something too floral for my taste but strong enough to wake the dead, when the screen lit up. Severe flash flooding in downtown corridor. Avoid low-lying areas. I blinked at the name of the street in the alert and laughed under my breath. Halverson Systems sat right in the middle of it. By noon, the photos started rolling in. Social media posts from soaked commuters, street-level videos of knee-high water pushing past storefronts, power transformers blinking out like dying stars. Then someone sent me a picture, blurry, from a cell phone, but unmistakable. The Halverson building. Water lapping over the first step of the entryway. The company banner flapping in the wind like it knew it was guarding a grave. I didn't panic, didn't rush to call anyone. I just scrolled, watched, and waited, like a scientist observing a controlled burn she had no intention of stopping. Around 2:13 p.m., I got the first call. Not from HR, not from Rolston, from Elijah, my old sysadmin. His voice was shaking. "It's down," he said. "Everything. Main data centers flooded. Backup generators aren't responding. Local vaults compromised." I asked the question like I didn't already know the answer. "What about the off-site mirror?" Silence. Then, "They never renewed it. I checked. There's nothing." Of course there wasn't. Rolston had cut that node out of the system like a tumor, bragging that we'd be fine in the cloud. I could still hear him saying it. Virtual resilience, not analog drag. He thought he'd future-proofed us by gutting the only thing standing between Halverson and digital oblivion. By 3:00 p.m., Slack threads from former colleagues were lighting up, screenshots of system errors, VPN failures, staff stuck outside because badge access had shorted. HR was directing people to wait for updates. Updates from who? Rolston? No one could reach him. The man was a ghost in a $1,000 windbreaker. The funniest part? He'd probably made a dashboard for this, some pretty little interface with uptime stats and colored graphs. But none of it mattered now. Because water doesn't care about dashboards. It doesn't care about quarterly cost savings. Water finds every weakness you pretended didn't exist and soaks it until the lights go out. And the lights? Oh, they went out. I watched it unfold from a distance. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just listened to the quiet. Not silence, not exactly. Just the soft unraveling of a machine whose gears had been stripped, whose fail-safes had been sold off, whose last working alarm had walked out with me that Friday afternoon and never looked back. There was a certain detachment to it. Not joy, not schadenfreude, just inevitability. Like watching a bridge collapse after someone said, "Don't worry, we don't need that support beam." They had all the data they needed. The warnings, the documentation, the signatures. And when the rain came, all that theater Rolston sneered at turned into the only script that could have saved them. Too bad no one bothered to rehearse. I was elbow deep in a client onboarding flow when my phone buzzed. Elijah again, this time with just 5 words. "They're here. Insurance is livid." I didn't have to ask who they were. Halverson's policy provider. The big one. The only reason anyone ever greenlit my continuity budget in the first place. Apparently, they'd sent a risk assessment team straight to the office less than 48 hours after the flood, not just to assess physical damage, but to verify that continuity standards had been upheld under the terms of the coverage agreement. Elijah filled in the rest over text. Insurers asked for the latest disaster recovery validation report. Something signed. Time-stamped. Showing that DR tests had been actively maintained post-policy renewal. Darren Rolston, smug as ever according to Elijah, walked them into the 3rd-floor compliance archive, pulled a red folder from the shared drive, and printed it without so much as a glance. That was his first mistake. They sat down in the big conference room. Legal joined via Zoom. IT director showed up late, still soaked from wading through the waterlogged main floor earlier that week. Rolston handed over the file like he was passing out candy. Elijah said he even smiled when he slid it across the table, muttering something about well-documented protocols. Then the insurer's rep opened it. Page 1, drill summary. Page 2, incident response flow. Page 3, failure timelines. It was clean, detailed, better than what they were probably used to. Then they reached the end. Elijah said the room shifted. Not exploded, shifted. That deadly slow inhale of professionals realizing something had gone deeply, irrevocably wrong. Because there it was. Final page. My signature. Dated 6 weeks before I was terminated. Right beneath it, in bold, decision to remove node confirmed by R. Rolston, 612. You could have heard the HVAC system coughing. The insurer's rep tapped the paper, leaned back, and asked a single question. Were any tests conducted after this? Rolston blinked, looked at the IT director, looked at the wall. HR stammered something about restructuring and resource alignment. The legal Zoom camera cut out. Or maybe someone killed the feed. Elijah said Rolston opened his mouth but said nothing. Just stared. Like the words had gotten stuck in the back of his throat somewhere between optimized and strategic. Meanwhile, I sat in my new office, 4 floors above a coffee shop that never floods, watching the city dry out and waiting. Not for vengeance, not for validation, for the silence. The silence that always comes when the paperwork finally speaks louder than the politics. Because that folder, that wasn't just a report, it was a mirror. And Rolston? He finally saw who was staring back. The email thread hit my inbox at 6:42 p.m. Elijah again, forwarding me a screenshot with the subject line, Array Clause 8C, immediate response required. It was short, 6 sentences, and just one attachment, a photo of the underlined clause in the policy, Clause 8C, coverage void where continuity tests are not maintained post-policy renewal, as outlined in sections 3.1 and 5.4. The insurer didn't yell, they didn't threaten, they just pointed, and let the silence do the rest. Inside the boardroom, the energy flipped. Elijah described it like watching a room realize the brakes were cut mid-descent. Legal leaned in. Compliance started flipping through their folders as if a second magic report might appear and save them. Were any tests conducted after this date? Asked the lead counsel from the insurer. Her tone was ice smooth, professional, the kind of calm that lets you know someone's done asking nicely. The Halverson lawyer, Margot something, opened her mouth, closed it, looked to HR. We believe there may have been simulations, informal, tabletop scenarios. HR's voice was cracked glass. The rep didn't blink. That's not what your policy stipulates. Section 3.1 specifies full environment DR validation, documented and signed. Nothing informal, nothing hypothetical. She slid the report across the table, the one with my name, my timestamp, my warning. That was the last verified test, June 14th. The policy renewed July word. You've maintained no qualifying test coverage since. Per clause 8C, coverage is rescinded. Rolston? According to Elijah, he went ghost white, like someone had unplugged him from his own fantasy. He reached for the report like he could change it by touching it, mumbled something about data validation layers and pending transitions. No one listened. He wasn't the loudest person in the room anymore. The insurer stood, packed their folders, and ended the meeting with surgical politeness. We'll follow up in writing. I advise you notify your board immediately. And just like that, they were gone. No door slam, no dramatic exit, just a vacuum where certainty used to be. I read Elijah's messages in my living room. No wine, no celebration, just me. A lukewarm bowl of noodles and the slow, bone-deep feeling of every overlooked hour, every redacted budget line, every patronizing, let's simplify this, finally landing where it belonged, on their ledgers, not mine. There's a kind of power in saying nothing, letting the documents speak. Letting time do what your arguments never could. They'd erased my title, but not my footprint. And when the storm came, that footprint was the only thing pointing to where the floor used to be. The payout denial came faster than anyone expected, officially stamped and delivered before the elevators were even fully drained. I saw the headline before Elijah could message me. One of the smaller tech blogs picked it up first, buried under finance briefs and merger gossip. Cure Infrastructure insurer denies Halverson claim after continuity breach, 9.4 more in damages uncovered. There wasn't even a quote from the company, just a cold, dry summary of the policy breach the clause cited and the implications. In-house systems compromised, vendor agreements broken, several federal contracts suspended, pending reassessment. The fallout hit like winter in an old house. Slow, creeping, inevitable. Board members stopped replying to internal emails. One of the compliance managers quietly updated her LinkedIn title to Seeking New Opportunities. And somewhere around 10:12 a.m., Darren Rolston's badge stopped working. No announcement. No drama. He was seen at the security desk, confused, trying to scan in 3 times before someone from HR met him in the lobby. The two of them disappeared into the side hallway. 15 minutes later, he was seen leaving through the service exit. No box, no laptop. Just a man in a $1,000 jacket and shoes that never touched a puddle until it was far too late. I didn't celebrate. I didn't send a message. But I did smile when I got the email from Halverson Legal. Subject: quick chat? Hi, hope you're well. Wondering if you'd have a moment to discuss continuity documentation related to your final DR submission. Just tying off a few open threads. Let us know what works for you. I didn't respond, because by then I was already 2 months into a consulting contract with one of their direct competitors. The kind of company that didn't ask why I scheduled quarterly drills. They asked if we could run them monthly. They didn't blink at hybrid environments, didn't balk at budgets for off-site redundancy. They even brought me coffee during our first tabletop simulation and told me quietly, "We saw what happened. You were right." That was all I needed. No payback, no vengeance, just clean execution, cold clarity. Halverson? They'll rebuild. Eventually. Maybe. But some scars don't fade. They harden into warnings, and for them, mine came typed, signed, and highlighted. My last journal entry from that week wasn't dramatic. Just 9 words, scrawled across the bottom of a yellow notepad, underlined once. Theater ends when the water rises, and they never saw the curtain drop.